Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our last session on technology diplomacy. And I congratulate all of those who have survived these 2 days. But it's also good if you are in your very first session, because this session actually, in a way, wraps up everything that we have been talking here over the past days. And actually, this is a reason also why tech diplomacy and also tech governance that is one integral part of tech diplomacy is higher in all of our agendas, not only here in Estonia, Europe, but also elsewhere, as we heard over the past 2 days. And I will maybe just summarize very briefly what are these main reasons that I'm sure all of you know, and we will hear more in detail from our panelists. So thank you so much. So we are all here in Estonia, and maybe one of these messages that you hear, or I hope you heard, is all the positives that technologies can bring. And I believe that Estonia indeed is a very good example of it, how the technological developments and digitalization can actually make a country much bigger than its physical size. It can improve our economy, our lives, our education, governance, democracy, and so forth. But what I guess you all also observed over these 2 days is that increasingly we are actually talking about all the risks that accompany digital developments. And I would say that the first one that was very much repeated here is the increasing concentration of these technological developments and also power. That, of course, automatically means that those countries where these technological developments do not take place, and Estonia is one of them, are automatically in a disadvantaged position. And I can guarantee that it's increasingly difficult to keep up with technological developments and make sure that everybody in our societies has these necessary skills and knowledge to employ technologies for their benefit. The second topic that has been reoccurring and I think has been the hit of these 2 days, perhaps illustrated by Musk-Trump relationship, is the increasing power of tech companies, and as we have seen also, private individuals. And this puts us in a completely new power dynamics, because private company power and influence overweighs often the one of the states. So it, on the one hand, puts states into this new situation, because they have to encounter and have an increasing dialogue with the private sector. But I believe it's also a new situation for private sector themselves to be such an important partner and look at their accountability and role in shaping our let's say, global landscape. And of course, the third one, which is also the topic of this year's Talent Digital Summit and partly also our session, is of course associated with all the risks and I would say potential misuses of digital technologies, from surveillance to increasing cyber attacks, ransomware, and all the bad things that we have been hearing over the past 2 days. So I would say that this is a core reason for tech diplomacy, and the reason why also diplomats increasingly have to deal with digital issues. So I will maybe briefly summarize the evolution of tech diplomacy as I see it and what it entails for Estonia, and then we will move further, and I will stop from my part. But when I started as Estonia's digital ambassador 4+ years ago, then I would say that the digital ambassador's role was seen more on the positive side. So the expectations for me were mainly associated with going around the world and telling all the nice things that Estonia is doing, introduce our companies, our solutions. To some other countries, I would say it still meant, let's say, Twitter diplomacy, so how we use digital technologies in diplomacy. I guess it was also emphasized more during the COVID period that we are almost about to forget by now. But I would say that increasingly, all tech diplomats have to deal with these issues on how, on the one hand, to make sure that we are technologically advanced, that we have these necessary partnerships, but on the other hand, how we make sure that we all feel good in this digital space, and the topic of technology governance, not only at national level or EU, that we will talk about, I would say, more in this panel, but also globally. And this concerns us all more and more every day, and a lot of processes are ongoing, and we are going to talk about it. So Estonia adopted its digital diplomacy paper this January, and we have there 5 pillars. And I'm not going to introduce them all, but just perhaps the 3, which I believe are also relevant for our discussion here. And the first one for us in Estonia is related to Estonia's own digital strengths, our position as a country globally in technological issues. And we will transfer this to EU level and also to global level. The second one is related to our collaboration with global partners. How do we collaborate with other countries, but also support other countries in this process of digital transformation? And the third one, as I mentioned, is related to technology governance. So this is shortly, I guess, an intro to our discussion, and I'm very glad that as our conference yesterday started with a very America focus, then the ending of our conference has a strong EU focus, and I believe it has been concern to many of us the role that Europe has in this technological landscape, often being, I guess, summarized only as a regulator, or definitely not the leader of the sector. So I would maybe start with Andrea Renda, who is the head of research of one of the more prominent think tanks in Europe. So from your point of view, following these developments all over the globe, what is that I missed that is important in digital development and, let's say, tech diplomacy? What does it entail, and what are these elements that we should be all aware of, and especially for those institutions that are represented in our panel today?
Yeah, thank you very much, Nele. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me at the Tallinn Digital Summit. And happy to be in between the EU and the UN, so being an independent thinker and a part of an independent think tank. What did we miss? Not you miss. We have missed something, evidently. And I tried to summarize a little bit why we still struggle with global technology governance when it comes to the interplay between public institutions and private players today. You go back in the early days of the internet, I think, where this problem started emerging very vibrantly. Of course, technology has been governed for centuries, but the beginning of the internet, the decision was, and the emergence of the internet was largely a spontaneous order, right? People called it the digital Far West. I remember a prominent scholar from New York University, Carol Rhodes, defined the internet as being like Central Park after dark. And those days, in particular, you could find excitement, but also danger, right? It was something that was largely left to the self-governing behavior of engineers and experts. And the decision was made by policymakers not to interfere too much. The early policy interventions during those years are largely leaving the neutrality, the openness, the self-governing nature of this digital ecosystem intact. Since then, we've seen a re-intermediation effect. The large corporations that have taken over a lot of the power, they have also captured a lot of the value produced by the internet over time. Another phase where some countries and some blocs, the EU in particular, started trying to bounce back. The GDPR is a good attempt. But still, we see today a situation in which the Far West might be coming back any time. We still see a situation in which there is a huge informational asymmetry between the private players that govern most of the technologies and the standards and policymakers that struggle with catching up. And we are in a situation where we're still largely, as researchers, academics, policymakers, largely potential praise of steering behavior by those that control technologies that are governed in a way that is difficult to grasp. I have two examples here. I'm going to only flash them to see whether I can provoke both sides. One is global AI governance. I think what we've seen in the last 2 years and a year and a half is a gradual drifting away of the debate and discussion from how to empower the global majority and make the benefits of AI accessible to them and how to achieve these sustainable development goals towards the existential risks of AI and the safety narrative. And this has created also a shift in venture capital towards artificial general intelligence as opposed to the AI solutions that we need to achieve the sustainable development goals. One example. The second, the digital public infrastructure, born out of initiatives such as the X-Road in Estonia, with key pillars such as build in-house as much as possible, open source, modular, open, really leveraging the potential of government as a platform. But if we see, and I don't know if you see it the same way, but if I've been for the past 3, 4, 5 months in conferences around the world on the digital public infrastructure, my impression is that that area too is morphing into a very privately governed sphere where some of the key tech giants control the very nice things that will happen under their umbrella. So I don't know if you see it the same way, but certainly I'll stop here and give you the floor, Nele, for you to continue.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. We will come back to some of these issues that you mentioned, because we see some technological developments, right? For example, AI, the attempt to, let's say, govern it globally, but we also see perhaps some trends that emerge that maybe it's just, let's say, rephrasing of something that has already existed, or perhaps one player to enter the global market. So we will come to this EU part and also the UN role here, but perhaps before that, maybe Thibaut and also David later from the European side, looking at this momentum also where we are currently. I know the Draghi report has been referenced perhaps too many times also here in these 2 days, but indeed it did, let's say, draw attention to some of the issues that are missing in Europe and what should and could be done, but also the momentum now that we have after the elections in the US. So Thibaut, what do you have in mind for Europe?
So Lene, I think also thanks for the invitation, and I think that it has been already a very interesting event yesterday and today in Tallinn with many important conversations. And indeed, in the EU, we are in a transition phase. Now, the new Commission is about to enter into action, and the big issue is that we have been very active in the past 5 to 10 years in developing this kind of European way to the digital transformation, which is based on values, which is based on key principles, which is based on the idea that the technology should be at the service of people, consumers, citizens, and not that basically we should all be serving the technology and through the technology either big corporations, like you were saying, or even governments, which is also another situation we see in some countries like China, Russia, or others. And I think the European model, if I may call it like that way, is really something in between, where we have tried through a series of regulations over the past 5 to 10 years to really develop a solution where the technology serves these values, these principles. But I think that today in Brussels, people realize that while we've been developing this and trying to really create a common view between our member states, we are still missing out in terms of our competitiveness, in terms of adoption of these digital technologies across the Union. So now I think it's actually paradoxically an opportunity to show what actually our offer is in terms of technology. Because as you were saying, Europe actually has a lot more than maybe comes to mind, because we don't maybe have the hyperscalers, but we have communities of developers that are doing exceptionally interesting work on open source, and not only around AI, around data, around 6G, around a number of applications, including our identity wallet, for instance, that really is an opportunity to transform government, to transform businesses. And I think now what we are trying to see under the label tech sovereignty is how to really put together this offer. You know, how can we actually map out the source and the resources we have to promote European-based technology and also demand for European technology. And I think that's really right now the opportunity. Is not just to watch what is happening, but actually to be concrete actors, not only through regulation, but through technology development.
Yes, thank you. I will go perhaps immediately to David, who is in charge of the digital diplomacy, but also Global Gateway, which is actually very much related to, let's say, this unified or comprehensive European offer. So from your side, we have been collaborating for the past year several times, and we have the Council conclusions on digital diplomacy. We are updating them every year, unfortunately not this year though. What are your plans to make this offer happening?
No, thanks very much. I think it's a very important point, and it's very good to sit here at the end of this intense couple of days and think about the main messages of everything that we've heard. I think, you know, to focus on one word, we're talking about tech diplomacy. And diplomacy, here the big challenge I think we've been trying to do is to ensure that all of the tech challenges are understood by all of the diplomats across the European Union. I think we've, as Thibaut said, we've been trying to form a common European view about our model, about what we have to offer and so on. But we also have been involved in a process in the past few years in trying to ensure that as many of our member states as possible can reach the level of Estonia in terms of understanding the potential of tech to become a diplomatic way of influence for us, of multiplying our influence around the world and so on. And that has involved this process of bringing foreign ministers into the conversation, which many of them were not involved in before. I think we have to be humble. This is one process. Of course, the influence of outside events brings the importance of tech onto their agenda perhaps more forcefully. And now we have to see how we're going to do it. I think the challenges are very clear, and we've heard a lot of them over the past few days. I think by the end of the day, if we have the Tallinn Digital Summit next year, we will all be heartily fed up of the word partnerships. Because I think everybody realizes that partnerships and alliances are the way to go. We have a number of partnerships, digital partnerships. We have a very successful experiment, if you like, going on with Latin America, where we're trying to bring together all of our partners in Latin America in a co-managed process, which I think was extremely successful. At the beginning, many of the countries in Latin America were told by some of their partners, do not join this. There will be consequences if you do. You shouldn't line up with the European Union and so on. But every few months, we now have 22 out of the 27 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean in this process with us, where we have co-managed workshops to discuss how we're going to take forward the challenges that Andrea talked about on e-governance, on AI governance, and so on. And I think this is really important in building the kind of links that we have that we can learn from. I think the biggest challenge geographically is going to be Africa. I think we have an EU-Africa summit coming next year, and I think from all the conversations that we've heard here, there's an enormous potential. There's a lot to fight for, but we see many of our partners in Africa who are just as concerned about the tech sovereignty that Thibaut talked about as we are. They don't want to be monopolized by anybody. And if Europe is not present, they're very welcome. We heard earlier this morning the minister from Angola saying, you're not present, please come, we want to work with you and so on. So I think we have a big diplomatic agenda in terms of our partnerships in many places around the world to see how we can align this model with a lot of our partners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we are here in a consensus that Europe needs to move further from promoting these values that we are all standing for and really have something practical to offer, and perhaps we will come back to this, but how do you see that from the UN side? Where does Europe situate and how? And maybe you can give our gentlemen some hints also how to make that plan better.
I'm thinking more from a a global citizen point of view myself, and also including my experience working in the private sector and in the investment sector. I think number one, Andrea said, what are the check and balance? And I see this is an era where we are balancing a lot of things, from collaboration to competition, from the efficiency gains to having a proper guardrail, from accelerating to results to checking if the process meets the compliance needs, right? But then everything is on steroids. The speed of it is a new challenge for governance and for diplomacy. I think if we look at AI, the speed of development, but also the decentralized nature. If we look at, for instance, the old challenges, such as nuclear power, it's not going to be something that you can make in your garage. But as we know, Facebook, Google, all these companies started in their garage. AI fall ahead all of a sudden. We don't know even who's working on it and what popped up. So the speed of it is the real challenge to governance. And I'd like to raise some interesting questions for everyone to think about, because the old governance structure of convening once a while and have a topic to the agenda, does that match the speed of technology development, number one? Does that match the nature of open source, as the panel members mentioned, and the power that, as you mentioned, that private sector and tech companies have? So there's the whole speed issue, there's the whole power shift issue, and then in between, there are a lot of questions about where the capital comes from. For instance, when you mentioned least developed countries and Africa, where are the capital is going, and where is the capital gain from meeting the society standards and also making profits? Another issue I find very interesting is trade-off, right? We're not looking at governance or whatever measures we put in without considering the trade-off. It's not going to be benefits in every case. There necessarily will be trade-offs. But different countries and different stakeholders view trade-offs in different ways. They are, countries may be more concerned with disinformation and mental health issues, versus they are countries or sectors more concerned about risks and risk and profitability. And then there are countries that are like, we don't even have the infrastructure and basic internet supplies, and we're still struggling with the poverty or fragile situation. We are willing to trade off much more to have the speed of technology that can benefit us. So in all these big chess games going on, how do we have more enablers that help everybody to meet their goal, number one. Number two, I also see the way that governance will look at now would not be just giving orders or instructions, but more like, how do different sectors see we need each other in what way, rather than I demand you to do so and so. I think that way wouldn't work in today's technology world, but more like, I'm private sector, but we need more guidelines and guidance on so and so. Or public sector would say we need more capital and foot soldiers and power to build infrastructure. Where are our interests aligned and values aligned? And how do international organizations facilitate this alignment? That would be the key. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. We will come back to these concrete examples of partnerships and working together with these 21 minutes that we have left. But you mentioned, of course, from, let's say, the global partnership perspective, the needs and the requirements and the support that the private sector has, which has been actually considered also one of these obstacles for Europe to scale its, let's say, offer and also increase its presence in our, let's say, in our global partner countries. And I don't want to get so stuck in one of these recent Politico articles, which I think touched a little surface on how the European sort of development funding actually is being implemented by companies from China or India, and in a way may actually not be in accordance with, let's say, with our policies and these values that we promote in these policies. But I have a question then to my European colleagues. What is missing in Europe for our companies to grow? I think it's maybe a little bit also, is it an internal market that we have not yet materialized? Is it something else? And what could be done there to make sure that the European companies can present us more and win these tenders that they currently do not tend to win?
I can start maybe on this. I mean, clearly we are not where we should be as Europe in terms of digital technologies, digital markets. We estimate that we import almost 80% of our products and services in this sector. And over the past 10 years, actually, Europe has lost something like 10% market shares globally that went, in fact, to the United States. So it shows that the trend has not been very, very positive. And probably the first problem we've had is that our own companies are not actually digitalizing fast enough. You know, if you look at countries like, Germany or, large sectors like even automotive, chemicals, and, transport in general, there are lots of possibilities to use, digital technologies that are still untapped. I mean, we have been now with 5G networks for 10 years. But 5G standalone is only in about 30% overall of the EU market. So it means that basically we are not using the technology that is available, and we really are missing in terms of the demand for this technology in established industries. The reason may be also the fault of some of the legislation that is not applied consistently across the EU. I mean, that's what people say about the GDPR. It's one regulation, but with something like 50 authorities making sure it is implemented. So we need to do better at simplification. We need to do better as having one rule for everyone so that really the demand of the single market is optimized. And I think that's one problem. The second one is also that we need to rock the boat. If you look at the US, I think the entrepreneurs are going against established players. In Europe, we tend to protect incumbents. And that's something maybe that also is something we need to attack. It's in our fabric. The national authorities sometimes are defending their national players instead of going for more consolidation. So I think that these two fronts is something that we want to go after in the European Commission. We will have proposals around AI in particular. So the AI and Cloud Act is something that will try to change this, to open markets. And I think through these opportunities, also with the new legislation we have, we hope that the incumbents, including the large US platforms, can find new challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but David, you are also responsible for Global Gateway, which is this, let's say, European trademark, taking, let's say, Europe outside. So from your everyday work and experiences, is that something that you can share? Do you see some obstacles there that maybe are repeating for European companies or European players? And perhaps you have also some good examples of how things have actually worked, and maybe that could be replicated in the future. Yeah.
I think as a complement to what Thibaut said, I think you also have to look in the new college. We will have a commissioner whose title is Commissioner not just for Financial Services, but for the Savings and Investment Union. And this is we tend to look at the regulatory issues, and we say the reason we don't have these companies is because the regulatory issues are too big and so on. But also, I think follow the money is a good example, and I don't know what the number is, but I think it's probably at least 300 billion euros of savings from Europeans in pension funds in banks are going into the American capital market every year, providing funding for US companies because of the lack of a functioning capital markets union in the European Union. So if you are a company in Europe and you want to scale up, regulation is one thing, but money is often another thing. And if money is easier to find somewhere else, you'll go where the money is. And if we don't have those type of opportunities in Europe, I think that's also one of the reasons. So I think we flagellate ourselves a lot and say GDPR is terrible and all the bureaucracy and so on, but I think we shouldn't neglect the fact that the lack of access to capital and the lack of these deep liquid capital markets is also a huge problem for European companies, not just in tech, but in other areas as well, I think. And I think a similar issue, Global Gateway, is also about investment. It's about trying to find a way of working together as Europe and channeling our investments towards our priorities. In the old days, development cooperation was basically inventing projects in the EU and developing this donor-beneficiary relationship. Now we're trying to move beyond that. We've realized that it didn't have the impact. We're behind on nearly all the sustainable development goals. So if we're behind on our own targets, we need to review what it is that we're doing. Our partners are asking us for more investment, so we need to find a way of mobilizing that investment. We're doing pretty well. We said 3 years ago we'd mobilize 300 billion during over the next 7 years. I think there was a report a couple of months ago where the Commission, we estimate there's about 179 billion of investments already been mobilized by what we call Team Europe. So not just the EU budget, but EIB, EBRD, and importantly, the development banks of the member states, because these are huge players. And what we're trying to do is to see how we can have a joined-up approach to investment by all of these Team Europe players in exactly the same way as we're doing internally to in our external markets. And I think we've learned a lot. We spent rather a long time, like we do in Brussels, figuring out who's in charge. All of that is all now fixed. We're making progress. A lot of these projects, of course, take a long time to come to fruition, but when we look at the numbers, I think the challenge in the next college will be to see how we can continue to make the best use of all of these different financing sources that we have. EBRD moving into sub-Saharan Africa, I think, will be really a big contribution as well. And we need to see how we can mobilize these investments behind the priorities, which I think are becoming clearer in support of the Sustainable Development Goals. When we look at the Global Digital Compact, we have a map there about how we need to work with our partners around the world on closing digital divides, on closing the investment gap, working on capacity development in AI, cybersecurity, and so on. So I think we know what we want to do, and we just need to, I think, as you say, execute faster.
Yeah, maybe I will let Andrea to comment, and then also Ao to step in, because you are in charge for partnerships at UN, and probably have also your view on the developments that have taken place. But maybe, Andrea, if you want to comment a bit.
I want to provoke a little bit my two friends here and then see whether I can make a good bridge to Ao. First of all, it's very important that we realize that tech diplomacy from the European perspective, and Thibaut and David know that very well, we discussed this in the past as well, is much more than the Brussels effect. And it's not just about issuing regulations and sort of imposing them to what we now call partner countries. It's not pretending that everyone takes on board the whole acquis, the digital acquis. And there's a lot that has to be done in cooperation mode. And here's a little bit of a problem, because the EU has been normally, traditionally, much better at shining from afar, like the nice little light on top of the hill, rather than dirtying its hands into actual cooperative settings. Also, the academic literature has been quite clear in that respect. So can the EU become a better partner? When you pursue global public goods today, you do this with multi-stakeholder partnerships. Sorry for the term that repeats. You also deal eminently with partnerships in the UN. And, but that is important. You have things that we call orchestration schemes, right? There are private sector, public sector, international governmental organizations, and civil society organizations jointly pursuing goals in an orchestrated way. And there is something, in my opinion, where the EU has to become a lot better going forward. If you look at Global Gateway, I think this reaches the peak. The past, and also I've been asked by DG INTPA, DG International Partnerships, a couple of years ago to come up with the master plan for digital connectivity in the Global Gateway. I think putting our hands in that problem, we saw, I think, some of the things that need to be solved faster now in the coming years. First, while the Foreign Affairs Council in the EU and the External Action Service have been clearly aiming at these Sustainable Development Goals as North Star of external action, in particular in international partnerships, the same thing doesn't happen in a global gateway very often and very consistently. There's very often a push for pursuing Europe's own interests as opposed to building the things that we should offer, that's the term, and I like it, in the sense of offering what in digital terms we call self-sovereign solutions to partner countries, where they can create and generate the value without having it captured by somebody else. That is more important than conquering market shares, and it's a key external dimension of the competitiveness sort of anxiety that we have today. It's very important that we do this. And we do this by developing the global offer and by offering this without necessarily, or really definitely and decisively departing from what in many parts of the world is still perceived as a neo-colonial approach, even in a digital infrastructure. For the global gateway, I think what is also important is two things, and then I stop. There's much more, but first, understanding what digital means in the global gateway is not just one pillar, but digital is also a layer that goes on top of every other infrastructure. And it's important, in particular, the data governance layer in the future global offer. It's also about digital energy, digital health, because this is what allows partner countries to retain the value that they generate and to develop technologies according to values that we all share. If we let other global powers or other investors, private in most cases, grab data and privately govern these solutions, I think the world will drift away from where we want it to go, more generally, including in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's one very important thing. The second, and I'll leave it there, but I think the Global Gateway has a very important pillar that, in my opinion, not only in my opinion, is completely underdeveloped, which is the research and education pillar. And this is exactly where I think we haven't achieved what David was evoking in his last comment, meaning the glue between what the EU does in terms of research and innovation and what it brings also to partner countries. The whole debate for the creation of a European Bank for Sustainable Development or Agency on Sustainable Development has been filled for now and temporarily by the creation of these regional hubs by the European Investment Bank around the world. I think this is an insufficient solution, and we need to find better solutions going forward, or at least use better the research and education pillar of the Global Gateway, because I think it's a little bit an orphan in that landscape of otherwise very important initiatives and Team Europe initiatives that should be executed better. Stop there.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrea. And before we move to our very final, let's say, part of our discussion, from the UN perspective, what do you see working? What do you see not working?
I want to go back to the original topic of technology diplomacy, right? So diplomacy is an old tool, I would say, that humans have been used since quite old time, call it diplomacy or not, as a means to an end. So what is the end? The end is joint prosperity and also maintaining peace among countries, so on and so forth. Now, when we add the new component, which is tech, to diplomacy, we added new tools and also addressing new challenges. So within that context, I want to touch on three components. One is the normative guidelines or patterns. Number two, capital. Number three, talents. Right? So if we look at the normative standards and guidelines and what's available, when we talk about, let's say, COVID, the recent lessons I learned from COVID was that even if you want the whole world to manage crisis in the same way, it's not going to happen, because different cultural contexts, different economic and regulation contexts would stipulate management into different ways. But what would be helpful is to see how different continents and countries manage and govern in different ways. So same apply to technology diplomacy. We see how the EU manages, and we see how Asia or different continents or the US manage it, and what are the things that each country or each sector can learn from that experience by looking at the pros and cons and what fit into their context. Those are very valuable lessons. Number two, a lot of the panelists talk about capital. So capital has its own rule of working and flowing, while the public sector try to guide and direct where the capital is going. But we really need to look at how to guide the capital in the way that would benefit the social general good, but also let the capital flow and get its own gain so they can be sustainable, not just as one-off enforced investment, but in the way that it sees the benefits and it keeps flowing. The third component is about talents. I do see big shift in the whole talents landscape as to a lot of young or new talents in the technology sector can work remotely. A lot of them return to their home country and home continents after educated overseas or getting capital overseas to build in their country or their community where there's an urgent need for technology and digital infrastructure, bringing their education outside knowledge to where they started and build into that community, which is a very appreciable efforts. So I think the next step would to see how different sectors building an ecosystem that support such a social entrepreneurship that meet people's ambition and their contribution and their a sense of citizenship or belongings to their community versus also let them bring the global value, the standards and shared goals in their practice. So these are the key components I'm thinking about. Yeah.
I think your first sort of element is actually a very good shift to our very final part of the discussion that we don't have enough time, but we can, of course, continue it after. And this concerns actually these common principles that guide us in digital collaboration and technology governance largely. Is it AI that Andrea mentioned at the beginning, data governance, also internet governance. And we are in this a pivotal moment, I would say, as in September, during the Summit of the Future, the world agreed on the Global Digital Compact. It has been a long process. It's one of the many, but indeed we all agreed on these principles that are there, even though it is also clear, I believe, for us, basing on this, let's say, this process of 2 years, that the extent to which we agree to these principles across the world is very different. There are choices, as the tech envoy has referred to them, over human rights, over multi-stakeholderism. So I would say that different countries value these things differently. And maybe my final, perhaps, question to those who can answer is around the implementation of this Global Digital Compact. So in this moment, what practical implications can we take from the Global Digital Compact and its implementation, and how would we see this implementation mechanism that would add value to all of us? So please, whoever wants to take the floor first.
Maybe just quickly, I think you're right. It's not we agreed and then it's all executed. I think it's the beginning of a conversation. Mm-hmm. I think for us, one of the main takeaways from the process was that the European Union tried repeatedly to play a role as a bridge builder. So whenever there were problems, we could try to see how we could talk with the G77 partners, with our African partners, with our like-minded partners, and come up with constructive solutions. We want to continue doing that as we move ahead in the implementation. And obviously that means two things. It means the various set-piece events like the IGF, like the WSIS and so on, that we prepare all of those and we try to work with our partners on that, but also all of the other issues that are coming up in terms of the new AI dialogue, the AI panel and so on, that we work with all our partners to ensure that we can continue to defend the gains that were made in the Global Digital Compact and avoid pushback, because there will be pushback. There will be people, as you said, who say, well, I agreed, but in implementation, they'll roll it back and so on. So I think we have a very clear way ahead, but you're right, implementation will require as much clear management and a lot of diplomacy as we move towards the end.
Andrea, please.
I can be telegraphic on two things that, in my opinion, will be useful to speed up implementation in a rather innovative and bold way. The first, we need a way to pool data in support of the delivery of global public goods from the private sector, sharing data on a regular basis for climate, for all the other, for pandemic prevention, for all the other, and for disinformation and so on and so forth. The second element that, in my opinion, is important is that the EU puts forward something that it has done in the Digital Services Act, and in my opinion, it's a very important mechanism to unlock the future digital social contract, which is social technical artifacts such as AI systems and algorithms have to be made available to researchers for them to perform risk assessment and to observe how they are being governed. That is a single principle that, if unpacked and applied all across the board, can change the way technology is governed around the world.
Oh, would you like to add from your side?
I think I'll use a concept from a communication theory called agenda setting, right? So anything now it's on the important agenda would start calling attention and getting resources into this field. So I would think that technology diplomacy and so on and so forth in those compact would gain more attention from think tanks, from different member states and from different sectors. So the fun just about to begin, and the beauty and the challenge is in the execution. And then I think the keys of the execution is to really think about where do we find the key components, who's going to contribute what, how do we align values and proposition, and how do we make it sustainable.
Thibaut, final word, and then I will wrap up.
Yes, very quickly. I think that broadly speaking, one can say that the Global Digital Compact is a big success, because we managed globally to agree that technology should be a force for good. And I think that was not a given. And I think we have also a conference around the corner in 2025 on the future of the internet, you know, the WISES plus 20. And there I can tell you that, again, the EU will want to protect also the multi-stakeholder model and avoid that this becomes a state-centric, rhetoric where technology is used against the people. I mean, that's really something that we avoided at the UN, so let's continue on that track. But I think that now the challenge is really in execution. So I would really join what the other panelists would do. We don't need new structures, we don't need new organizations. What we need is to work together, really, to deliver on the ground the benefits from the digital technologies.
Thank you all. Our time is over, has been for quite some time. I want to thank you. I believe we can end in a rather positive note. We have all come to an agreement that we want technology to work for good. And as we have also heard, Europe has strong plans to execute these values that we are standing for. So I would look forward for the next step, and I would like to applaud to our panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nele.